Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his brow as his transport ship descended through the crimson atmosphere of Nyxeria. The red-tinged clouds swirled around the vessel like angry spirits, and through the viewport he could see the massive crystalline spires of the royal capital jutting up from the planet's surface like frozen lightning. 3 months of hyperspace travel had brought him here, to the edge of known space, all because some alien civilization couldn't figure out how to fix their own power grid. The ship touched down with a bone-jarring thud that made Jake's teeth rattle. He gathered his engineering kit, checking that his tools were secure in their worn leather pouch. Among the plasma welders and quantum screwdrivers sat his most trusted companion, a simple folding knife that had belonged to his grandfather. The blade was barely 4 inches long, its metal dulled by decades of use, but it had helped him solve more engineering problems than any fancy gadget. As Jake stepped off the transport, the first thing that struck him was the gravity. Nyxeria's pull was at least 30% stronger than Earth's, making each step feel like he was walking through thick mud. The air tasted of copper and ozone, with an underlying sweetness that made his nose tingle. The spaceport bustled with activity as tall, elegant beings moved with fluid grace between the landing pads. A figure approached him, draped in flowing robes that seemed to shift color in the alien sunlight. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, with skin that held a subtle golden hue and eyes like molten amber. "You are the human engineer," the figure said, its voice carrying musical undertones that made Jake's translator struggle to keep up. "Jake Morrison, at your service," Jake replied, extending his hand before remembering that most alien cultures found human handshakes either primitive or threatening. "I'm here about your power distribution problems." The alien, who introduced himself as Counselor Dex, led Jake through corridors lined with what appeared to be living crystal. The walls pulsed with soft light, and Jake's scanner picked up energy readings that made his engineer's heart race. This wasn't just architecture. It was a living machine, a fusion of biology and technology that human science could barely comprehend. "The plasma core that powers our capital has been experiencing fluctuations," Dex explained as they walked. "Our finest technicians have been unable to stabilize it." Jake nodded, pulling out his scanner to take readings. The energy signatures were unlike anything he'd encountered, but the basic principles seemed familiar. "What kind of fluctuations are we talking about? Power spikes, drops, or complete failures?" "The latter, I'm afraid. The last failure caused a complete blackout of the Royal District." They rounded a corner and entered a vast chamber that took Jake's breath away. The throne room stretched before them like a cathedral designed by gods, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows far above. Pillars of living crystal supported the structure, each one pulsing with inner light that created dancing patterns on the polished floor. But it wasn't the architecture that made Jake stop in his tracks. It was the scene unfolding before the massive throne at the chamber's far end. A warrior knelt before the throne, his massive frame dwarfing even the other tall aliens in the room. In his hands, he held a sword that looked like it had been forged from starlight itself. The blade was easily 6 feet long, its edge gleaming with an inner fire that hurt to look at directly. On the throne sat the most beautiful woman Jake had ever seen. Queen Zephyra was tall even by her species' standards, with skin that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Her hair cascaded in waves of silver and gold, and her eyes held the deep blue of Earth's oceans. She wore a gown that seemed to be woven from liquid moonlight, and when she moved, it was with the grace of a dancer who could command armies with a gesture. "Your Majesty," the kneeling warrior rumbled, his voice like distant thunder, "I offer my blade in service to your crown." "Queen." Zephyra examined the weapon with the expression of someone who had seen this performance many times before. Her eyes, brilliant as sapphires, revealed nothing but polite interest. "Commander Voss," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Your blade is impressive." The warrior's shoulders straightened with hope, but the queen continued. "However, impressiveness is not worthiness. The right of the blade demands more than simple craftsmanship." Jake watched as the warrior's face fell. The massive sword, which had seemed so magnificent moments before, now looked somehow inadequate in his hands. He rose slowly, backing away from the throne with his head bowed, and Jake caught a glimpse of genuine pain in his alien features. The queen's gaze swept across the assembled court. Dozens of golden-skinned beings in elaborate dress, all watching the proceedings with the intensity of spectators at a gladiatorial match. When her eyes reached Jake, they stopped. For a moment, the throne room fell silent, except for the distant hum of the power core and Jake's suddenly thunderous heartbeat. "And what?" Queen Zephyra asked, her voice carrying across the chamber like a challenge. "Do we have here?" Every head in the room turned toward Jake. He felt like a mouse that had wandered into a convention of very large, very attractive cats. Counselor Dex appeared at his elbow, moving with the desperate speed of someone trying to prevent a diplomatic incident. "Your Majesty, this is the human engineer, here to repair the plasma core. He became lost?" "Lost?" The queen's eyebrow arched with surgical precision. How fascinating. Jake's scanner chose that moment to emit a sharp beep. The readings showed massive energy fluctuations coming from directly beneath the throne room. If he was right, the main power conduit ran right under the queen's feet, and it was about to overload. "Actually," Jake said, stepping forward with the confidence of a man who had talked his way out of worse situations, "I'm exactly where I need to be. That power conduit under your throne is about to turn this whole room into the universe's most expensive barbecue." The court gasped. Several aliens reached for weapons that looked like they could level city blocks. But Queen Zephyra leaned forward, and Jake caught a hint of something that might have been amusement in her brilliant eyes. "Is that a threat, little human?" "More like a professional assessment, Your Majesty." Jake pulled out his scanner and showed her the readings. "See this? Red zone? That's what we call the oh no range. Your plasma core is backing up through the entire system. Give it another few minutes, and this whole wing is going to light up like a supernova." The queen studied him with the intensity of someone trying to decide whether he was brilliant or insane. Jake had gotten that look before, usually right before. Someone either promoted him or fired him. "You interrupt the right of the blade," she said slowly, "to discuss electrical work." "I interrupt the right of the blade to prevent it from becoming the right of the crispy aliens," Jake replied. "But hey, priorities." A ripple of shocked whispers ran through the court. Jake caught fragments. Disrespectful, insolent, should be executed. He figured he'd already dug his grave deep enough to install plumbing. But Queen Zephyra laughed. The sound was like silver bells mixed with starlight, and it cut through the tension like a plasma torched through butter. She rose from her throne with fluid grace, and Jake revised his estimate of her height upward. She had to be at least 7 feet tall, with legs that seemed to go on forever. "You amuse me, human," she said, descending the steps with predatory elegance. "Tell me, what do you know of the right of the blade?" Jake glanced around the throne room, taking in the assembled warriors, the ceremonial weapons, the general atmosphere of martial competition. "Lucky guess. You're picking a champion, and the selection process involves sharp objects." Another shocked gasp from the court. Queen Zephyra's smile widened, showing teeth that were definitely not human, but somehow made her even more attractive. "The right of the blade is an ancient ceremony," she explained, circling him like a predator studying prey. "Potential champions must prove their worthiness through displays of skill, strength, and honor. The winner earns the right to stand beside the throne." "Sounds like a blast," Jake said, his scanner beeping more insistently. "Now about that power conduit." "The ceremony is not complete," the Queen interrupted. "We have not yet found a worthy blade." Jake's mind raced as he realized the trap closing around him. The energy readings were getting worse by the second, but he was caught in the middle of some alien ritual that he didn't understand. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I really need to access that conduit before your palace becomes a crater." "Queen." Zephira's eyes glinted with dangerous amusement. "Then perhaps you should participate in the ceremony, Jake Morrison. After all, you seem so confident in your ... abilities." The court erupted in laughter as Jake realized he'd just been challenged to prove himself in an alien combat ritual. And somewhere beneath their feet, the power core continued its inexorable countdown to disaster. The laughter echoed through the throne room like thunder, each alien voice adding to the cacophony of amusement. Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment, but he'd learned long ago that backing down from a challenge usually made things worse. Queen Zephira watched him with those impossible blue eyes, and he could see the calculation behind her amusement. She was testing him, pushing him to see what he was made of. "Your Majesty," Counselor Dex interjected nervously, "surely the human doesn't understand the implications of—" "I understand perfectly," Jake interrupted, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. "You want to see what I can do with this." He reached into his tool belt and pulled out his grandfather's folding knife, its worn handle familiar in his palm. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a silence so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. The small blade looked pathetic in the vast throne room, dwarfed by the massive ceremonial weapons displayed around the chamber. Commander Voss, still nursing his wounded pride from earlier, let out a snort of derision. "That is not a blade," he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent his life mastering weapons. "That is a tool for opening packages." "Funny thing about tools," Jake replied, testing the knife's edge with his thumb. "They tend to be more useful than decorations." Queen Zephira descended the final steps to the throne room floor, her movements hypnotic in their grace. Up close, Jake could see the intricate patterns etched into her skin, markings that seemed to shift and flow like living tattoos. She smelled of something exotic and intoxicating, a scent that made his pulse quicken despite the danger he was in. "The right of the blade consists of 3 trials," she explained, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear. "Strength, skill, and wisdom. Most who attempt it possess only the first 2. And the third?" Her smile was enigmatic. "That remains to be seen." She stepped back and raised her voice to address the court. "The human has accepted the challenge. The trials will begin at once." The throne room erupted in excited chatter. Jake caught fragments of conversation betting odds, speculation about how quickly he'd fail, graphic descriptions of what the trials would do to his human anatomy. He was beginning to regret his decision when he felt a gentle touch on his arm. "Come," Queen Zephira said, leading him toward a side passage. "We must prepare you for what's to come." They walked through corridors lined with tapestries depicting great battles and legendary heroes. Jake's scanner continued to beep warnings about the power core, but he forced himself to focus on the immediate problem. The Queen moved beside him with fluid grace, and he found himself stealing glances at her profile. "Tell me about your world," she said as they walked. "What are humans like?" "Stubborn," Jake replied without hesitation. "We tend to bite off more than we can chew, and then figure out how to chew it anyway." "And you? Are you stubborn, Jake Morrison?" "My ex-wife certainly thought so." The Queen laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I think I would have liked your ex-wife." They entered a circular chamber where weapons of every description hung from the walls. Swords, spears, axes, and things Jake couldn't even identify glittered in the soft light. At the center of the room stood a pool of what looked like liquid starlight, its surface rippling with patterns that hurt to look at directly. "The first trial is strength," Queen Zephyra explained, gesturing to the pool. "You must lift the hammer of storms from the bottom of the pool. The weapon weighs as much as a small building, and the pool itself will resist your efforts." Jake stared at the pool, his engineering mind already working on the problem. "What's the liquid made of?" "Concentrated. Gravitational field. It will make anything within it 10 times heavier." "And I'm supposed to lift a building-sized hammer through that?" "The champions of my people have done so for generations." Jake knelt beside the pool, studying its surface. The liquid moved strangely, following patterns that suggested complex electromagnetic fields. His scanner showed readings that made his head spin. This wasn't just a gravitational field. It was a carefully controlled space-time distortion. "Interesting," he murmured, pulling out his plasma welder. "Mind if I ask why the hammer is at the bottom of the pool?" "It fell there during the last trial. The previous challenger was unsuccessful." Jake began making adjustments to his welder, calibrating it for the specific energy signature of the pool. "You know, where I come from, we have a saying, work smarter, not harder." "What are you doing?" "Changing the rules." Jake activated the welder, directing its beam into the pool. The liquid began to react, its surface churning as the energy field destabilized. "See, the thing about gravitational fields is that they're really just warped space-time. And space-time doesn't like being hit with concentrated plasma." The pool's surface exploded upward in a geyser of light, and through the chaos, Jake could see the hammer of storms rising as if lifted by invisible hands. He reached out with his small knife, using it to guide the massive weapon to the pool's edge. "Impossible," Commander Voss breathed. "Not impossible," Jake corrected, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just improbable." Queen Zephyra stared at him with something that might have been admiration. "You didn't lift it with strength. I used what I had. Isn't that what wisdom is about?" Before she could answer, the floor beneath them shuddered. Jake's scanner went berserk, its readings off the charts. The power core was entering critical. "Overload." "Your Majesty," he said urgently, "we need to postpone this. If I don't get to that conduit in the next few minutes, your entire palace is going to be a smoking crater." But Queen Zephyra was already shaking her head. "The trials cannot be stopped once begun. It is law. Then we better move fast." Jake grabbed his tools and headed for the door. "Where's the second trial?" She led him deeper into the palace, through corridors that seemed to bend and twist in impossible ways. Jake's scanner showed that they were moving directly toward the power core, which was both fortunate and terrifying. The energy readings were approaching critical levels. They emerged onto a balcony that overlooked a vast arena. The space was filled with obstacles, spinning blades, jets of flame, pits that seemed to have no bottom. At the center stood a pedestal holding a single crystal that pulsed with inner light. "The second trial is skill," Queen Zephyra explained. "You must navigate the arena and retrieve the heart of Nexaria without being killed by the defenses." Jake studied the obstacles, his mind cataloging threat patterns and energy signatures. The spinning blades were controlled by magnetic fields, the flame jets followed predetermined sequences, and the pits were actually holographic projections. It was a deadly puzzle, but it was still a puzzle. "How long do I have?" "The trial ends when you succeed or die." Encouraging. Jake checked his tools, making sure everything was secure. "One more question. What happens if I fail?" Queen Zephyra's expression softened slightly. "Then you die, and my planet dies with you." The weight of responsibility settled on Jake's shoulders like a lead blanket. He wasn't just trying to prove himself anymore. He was trying to save an entire world. And somewhere in the depths of the palace, The power core continued its countdown to catastrophe. "Well," he said, adjusting his tool belt. "No pressure." He stepped into the arena, his small knife in one hand and his plasma welder in the other. Behind him, Queen Zephyra watched with eyes that held something deeper than mere interest. The first spinning blade whooshed past his head, close enough to ruffle his hair, and Jake Morrison began the most important obstacle course of his life. The arena's defenses activated with mechanical precision, and Jake found himself dancing between death and salvation, while the fate of two worlds hung in the balance. Jake ducked under a spinning blade that would have separated his head from his shoulders, rolled to avoid a jet of superheated plasma, and came up running toward the next obstacle. The arena's defenses were designed to kill, but they followed patterns, and patterns could be predicted. His engineer's mind cataloged each threat, calculating trajectories and timing sequences. A pit opened beneath his feet, and Jake leaped across it without breaking stride. The holographic projection flickered slightly at the edges, confirming his suspicions. The real danger wasn't falling. It was the energy grid that would electrocute anyone who touched the false floor dot behind him. Queen Zephyra watched from the balcony, her expression unreadable. The assembled court had gathered to witness the trial, their golden faces reflecting the arena's deadly light show. Jake could feel their eyes on him, waiting for the fragile human to fail. "Come on, Morrison," he muttered, pulling out his scanner, while dodging another spinning blade. "Think like an engineer, not a warrior." The device showed him what his eyes couldn't see, the control systems that governed the arena's defenses. Every obstacle was connected to a central processor, and that processor was located directly beneath the heart of Nexaria. If he could access the maintenance panel, he could shut down the entire system. But first, he had to survive long enough to reach it. Jake sprinted forward, using his small knife to deflect an energy bolt that would have vaporized his chest. The blade's worn metal conducted the energy safely to ground, a trick his grandfather had taught him decades ago. "Always know your materials," the old man had said. "Metal has memory." He reached the central pedestal and dove beneath it, ignoring the automated defenses that tried to track his movement. His scanner showed him the maintenance panel, hidden behind a layer of crystalline armor. Jake pulled out his plasma welder and began cutting through the barrier. "What are you doing?" Queen Zephyra's voice echoed through the arena. "Cheating," Jake called back, his welder making short work of the crystalline armor. "It's a human specialty." The defenses shut down abruptly, leaving the arena in sudden silence. Jake emerged from beneath the pedestal, the heart of Nexaria glowing in his palm like a captured star. The court erupted in amazed whispers, but he ignored them. His scanner was screaming warnings about the power core. "Your Majesty," he said, jogging back to the balcony. "We're out of time. The core is about to breach." But Queen Zephyra was staring at him with something that looked like wonder. "You shut down the arena's defenses. I solved the problem. Isn't that what the trial was about?" "The trial was about skill with weapons. I used the weapon I had, my brain." Before she could respond, the palace shuddered around them. Emergency. Lights began flashing, and Jake could hear the distant sound of evacuation alarms. The power core was entering the final stages of overload. "The third trial," Queen Zephyra said urgently. "You must complete the third trial. There's no time." "If I don't get to that conduit, the third trial is wisdom," she interrupted. "And wisdom is knowing when to break the rules." Jake stared at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You've been testing me. I've been preparing you." She took his hand, her touch sending electricity through his nervous system. "The right of the blade isn't about choosing a champion. It's about choosing a partner." "Partner?" "My people are dying, Jake. Not from war or disease, but from stagnation. We've become so focused on tradition that we've forgotten how to adapt." You've shown me something I'd forgotten, that wisdom isn't about following old rules. It's about finding new solutions. They ran through corridors that trembled with increasing violence. Jake's scanner showed them the way to the power core, its readings painting a picture of imminent catastrophe. The energy contained within the core was enough to crack the planet's crust, and the containment fields were failing. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jake asked as they ran. "Because you needed to prove yourself first. Not to me, but to yourself. You've spent your life being underestimated, haven't you?" Jake thought about his ex-wife, who'd left him for someone with a more stable career. His colleagues who'd dismissed him as a simple repairman. At countless times he'd been overlooked. For promotions or recognition. Yeah, you could say that. They reached the core chamber, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The power core was a miniature star, contained within a sphere of crystalline energy that pulsed with barely controlled fury. Cracks were spreading across its surface, and each fracture released another burst of deadly radiation. "The containment field is collapsing," Jake said, his scanner painting the chamber with angry red warnings. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before it breaches. Our engineers said it would take days to repair." "Your engineers think like your people, linear, traditional. Sometimes you need to think like a human." Jake pulled out his tools, including the small folding knife that had caused so much laughter in the throne room. "We can't repair the containment field, but we can redirect the energy." He began working with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew that failure meant death. The knife became a precise instrument in his hands, cutting through crystalline conduits with surgical precision. His plasma welder reshaped the energy pathways, creating new channels for the overloaded system. "The power core is connected to the city's infrastructure," he explained while he worked. "If we can create a controlled discharge through the palace's defensive grid, we can bleed off the excess energy before it reaches critical mass." Queen Zephyra watched him work, her expression mixing admiration with growing affection. "You're risking your life for people you barely know." "I'm risking my life for someone I'm beginning to care about," Jake replied without looking up from his work. Funny how that works. The core's pulsing grew more erratic, and Jake could feel the heat from its radiation warming his skin. He made the final connections, then held his breath as he activated the new energy pathway. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the palace's lights flickered, and the core's angry red glow began to fade to a more manageable amber. "It's working," Queen Zephyra breathed. Jake sagged against the nearest wall, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "Yeah, it's working. But this is just a temporary fix. You need to rebuild the entire power distribution system. We have time. Now, thanks to you." She moved closer, and Jake found himself lost in those impossible blue eyes. "So what happens now? Do I get exiled for cheating on your trials?" "You passed the trials," she said softly. "All of them. You showed strength by thinking beyond brute force, skill by solving problems instead of just fighting them, and wisdom by knowing when to break the rules. And what does that mean, exactly?" Queen Zephyra's smile was radiant. "It means you've earned the right to stand beside the throne, if you want it." Jake looked around the core chamber, with its alien technology and impossible energies. He thought about his small apartment on Earth, his lonely existence fixing other people's problems. Then he looked at the woman beside him, brilliant and beautiful, and clearly interested in more than just his engineering skills. "I might need some time to think about it," he said. "Take all the time you need. But perhaps you could think about it while helping me rebuild my world." Jake Morrison, the man who'd been mocked for his tiny blade and simple tools, found himself smiling. "I think I'd like that." And in the depths of the palace, the power core pulsed with steady light, a symbol of new beginnings and the power of human ingenuity to overcome any obstacle. 3 days after Jake had stabilized the power core, The palace was buzzing with activity. Engineers from across the system had arrived to study his innovative solutions, and Jake found himself in the unusual position of being treated as a celebrity. Queen Zephyra had insisted he stay in the royal quarters while they worked on permanent repairs to the power grid, and Jake was beginning to enjoy the luxurious accommodations. He was reviewing power distribution schematics in his temporary workshop when the first explosion rocked the palace. The lights flickered, and Jake's scanner immediately began showing massive energy surges throughout the building. Emergency alarms blared as he grabbed his tools and ran toward the throne room. The scene that greeted him was chaos. The beautiful crystalline columns were cracked and sparking. Royal guards lay unconscious on the polished floor, and Queen Zephyra was backed against her throne, facing a group of armed insurgents. At their head stood a figure Jake didn't recognize, tall, muscular, with skin that held a deeper golden hue than the other aliens. "General Kronos," the queen said, her voice steady despite the obvious danger. "I should have known you were behind this. You should have abdicated when you had the chance," the general replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Your fascination with primitive aliens has weakened our entire civilization." Jake slipped into the throne room through a side entrance, keeping to the shadows as he assessed the situation. The general had at least 20 soldiers with him, all armed with energy weapons that could vaporize a human with a single shot. But Jake's scanner was showing him something else. The soldiers' weapons were connected to the palace's power grid, drawing energy from the same systems he'd just repaired. "The people chose me to lead them," Queen Zephyra said, her chin raised defiantly. "Not you." "The people are fools," General Kronos snarled. "They've been corrupted by your weakness, your willingness to embrace inferior species. This human of yours, he's turned you into a laughingstock. That human saved our world. That human has doomed our world. We were strong before he arrived, pure. Now you want to pollute our bloodlines with alien contamination." Jake felt anger surge through him at the general's words. He'd heard similar sentiments on Earth, from people who feared anything different from themselves. But he forced himself to remain calm, to think like an engineer rather than react like a warrior. "Where is your pet human now?" General Kronos continued. "Has he abandoned you already?" "I'm right here," Jake said, stepping out of the shadows. "And I'm not going anywhere." The general's soldiers swung their weapons toward him, but Jake was already moving. He pulled out his plasma welder and fired a precisely aimed beam at the power conduit running behind the throne. The conduit exploded in a shower of sparks, and half the soldiers' weapons went dark. "Impossible," General Kronos breathed. "How did you—" "I built this system," Jake replied, diving behind a pillar as energy bolts scorched the air where he'd been standing. "I know all its weaknesses." The battle that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. The throne room became a war zone as Queen Zephyra's loyal guards engaged the insurgents, energy weapons painting the chamber with deadly light. Jake used his knowledge of the palace's systems to turn the building itself into a weapon, overloading conduits to create explosive distractions and redirecting power to give the Queen's forces an advantage. But General Kronos was a skilled tactician, and his soldiers were experienced warriors. They pressed forward relentlessly, driving the defenders back toward the throne. Jake found himself fighting alongside Queen Zephyra, their backs to the wall as the general's forces closed in. "This is hopeless," one of the guards gasped, his weapons charge nearly depleted. "We're outnumbered." "Not outnumbered," Jake corrected, pulling out his grandfather's folding knife. "Outgunned. But that's never stopped humans before." He sprinted toward the nearest power conduit, ignoring the energy bolts that singed his hair. His small knife sliced through the conduit's protective sheathing, and Jake grabbed the exposed power cable with his bare hands. The energy surge should have killed him instantly, but the knife's worn metal acted as a conductor, channeling the raw power safely through his body. "What are you doing?" Queen Zephyra screamed. "Something incredibly stupid," Jake replied, his body glowing with channeled energy. "Or incredibly brilliant. Haven't decided yet." He released the power cable and directed the energy toward the throne room's defensive systems. The ancient weapons that had protected the palace for centuries came online, their targeting systems locking onto the insurgents' weapons. Energy bolts lanced across the chamber, disarming General Kronos' soldiers with surgical precision. "Surrender," Jake called out, his voice amplified by the palace's communication system. "You're outgunned now." But General Kronos wasn't finished. He pulled out a weapon Jake hadn't seen before, a blade that seemed to be made of pure energy, its surface crackling with deadly power. "I'll kill you myself, human," he snarled, advancing on Jake with deadly intent. Jake stood his ground, his small folding knife looking pathetic compared to the general's energy blade. But he'd learned something during his time on Nexarius. Didn't matter as much as skill, and skill didn't matter as much as determination. The general's first strike would have cut a normal man in half, but Jake wasn't there when the blade arrived. He'd rolled to the side, using his knife to deflect the energy weapon's edge. The worn metal shouldn't have been able to resist such power, but Jake's grandfather had been a metallurgist, and he'd taught his grandson that the right alloy could conduct anything. They fought across the throne room, the general's massive energy blade clashing against Jake's tiny knife. To the observers, it looked like a mismatch, but Jake was fighting with the precision of an engineer and the desperation of a man in love. Every strike was calculated, every movement designed to redirect the general's power rather than resist it. "You cannot win, human," General Kronos panted, his energy blade beginning to flicker as its power core overheated. "I am a warrior born and bred. You are nothing but a repairman." "You're right," Jake replied, parrying another strike. "I am a repairman, and you're broken." With a movement too quick to follow, Jake's knife found the general's weapon, sliding between the energy matrix and the power core. The blade shorted out in a spectacular explosion of light, and General Kronos stumbled backward, suddenly weaponless. "It's over," Queen Zephyra said, her guards moving to surround the defeated general. "Surrender, and you'll be treated with the honor your service once deserved." General Kronos looked around the throne room, taking in his defeated soldiers and the human who had outfought him with nothing but a folding knife. "This isn't over," he said finally. "There are others who believe as I do. This contamination will not be allowed to spread." "Then they'll have to deal with me," Jake said, helping Queen Zephyra to her feet. "And I've gotten pretty good at solving problems." As the insurgents were led away, Queen Zephyra turned to Jake with eyes that held something deeper than gratitude. "You risked your life for me, for my people." "I risked my life for my future," Jake replied, taking her hand. "Funny how that works." And in the restored peace of the throne room, with the power core humming steadily in the depths below, Jake Morrison realized that sometimes the smallest blade could cut through the biggest problems. The victory celebration lasted 3 days, but Jake barely noticed the festivities. He was too busy working alongside Queen Zephyra to repair the damage from General Kronos' coup attempt and plan for the future of their two worlds. They worked side by side in the palace's technical centers, her regal grace complementing his practical efficiency in ways that surprised them both. "Your people are remarkable," Zephyra said as they reviewed the final specifications for the new power distribution system. "This design would have taken our engineers months to develop." "My people are stubborn," Jake corrected, making a final adjustment to the schematics. "We don't like giving up, even when the smart thing to do is quit." They were alone in the workshop, the soft light of the crystalline walls casting rainbow patterns across their work. Jake had grown accustomed to the alien environment, and Zephyra seemed equally comfortable with his human technology. It was a partnership that neither had expected, but both had come to treasure. "The power grid is stable now," Jake said, setting down his tools. "Your engineers can handle the maintenance. From here, I suppose that means my job is done." Queen Zephyra looked up from the holographic display they'd been working on, her golden eyes reflecting something that might have been sadness. "Does it? Is that what you want?" Jake had been dreading this moment for days. His transport back to Earth was scheduled to leave in the morning, and he'd been trying to convince himself that returning to his old life was the right thing to do. But looking at Zephyra now, her silver hair catching the light like spun starlight, he realized he'd been lying to himself. "What I want," he said carefully, "is to stay here with you. But I don't know if that's possible." "Why wouldn't it be possible?" "Because I'm human, and you single quotes re.u. I'm a repairman from a backwater planet, and you're a queen who rules star systems. The math doesn't work." Zephyra smiled, rising from her chair with that fluid grace that still took his breath away. "You know what I learned from watching you work. Sometimes the best solutions come from ignoring the math." She moved closer, and Jake could smell that intoxicating scent that seemed to be uniquely hers. "My people have a saying, 'The heart sees what the mind cannot calculate.' I think your people would understand that. My people also have a saying, 'Love is blind,' not exactly encouraging. Then perhaps we should trust something other than sight." She reached out and placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. "What does this tell you?" Jake's heart was racing, and he was pretty sure she could feel it through his shirt. "That I'm terrified." "Good, so am I." Before he could respond, she kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, as if she was afraid he might pull away. But Jake had been thinking about this moment for days, and when her lips met his, all his doubts evaporated. He pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms, despite their difference in height. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. "That was double quotes," Jake began. "Different," Zephyra finished. "But good different. Very good different." They stood there for a moment, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air and trying to process what had just happened. Then Zephyra stepped back, her expression becoming more serious. "I have something to tell you," she said, "about the rite of the blade ceremony, about why I really brought you here." Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "You didn't really need an engineer, did you?" "Oh, we needed an engineer. The power core was genuinely failing. But I could have hired any number of qualified technicians from a dozen different worlds. I specifically requested a human engineer." "Why?" "Because I'd been studying your species for months, reading your literature, watching your entertainment broadcasts, analyzing your history. I was fascinated by your ability to solve problems through innovation rather than tradition. And I was looking for someone who could help my people learn to think differently." Jake processed this information, unsure how to feel about it. "So, this was all a setup? The trials, the ceremony, everything?" "The trials were real. The danger was real. And my feelings." She touched his cheek gently. "My feelings are very real. But you manipulated me. I created an opportunity for you to show who you really are. Just as you created an opportunity for me to see beyond the limitations of my own culture." Jake thought about this, his engineer's mind working through the implications. "You needed someone to shake up your world. I needed someone to save my world, not from the power core failure, but from stagnation, from the fear of change that was killing us slowly. And you thought a human could do that? I thought you could do that. And I was right." Jake walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights were brighter now, thanks to the improved power grid, and he could see construction crews working to repair the damage from the coup attempt. People were moving with purpose, working together in ways that transcended old boundaries. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we build something new. A partnership between our worlds, starting with a partnership between us. The Council will never accept a human as your consort. The Council will accept whatever I tell them to accept. I'm still the Queen, remember?" Jake turned back to her, studying her face in the soft light. "And what about the people who think like General Kronos? The ones who see humans as inferior? They'll learn. And if they don't, they'll find themselves on the wrong side of history. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple." She moved to join him at the window, her hand finding his. "We face the problems together, and we solve them one at a time." Jake looked down at their joined hands, her golden skin contrasting beautifully with his pale human flesh. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love you too," she replied, "even if you are terribly short by our standards. Hey, I'm average height for a human. Average height for a human is terribly short by our standards." They laughed together, the sound echoing through the workshop like music. Outside, the city of Nexaria continued its eternal dance of light and shadow. But inside the palace, two beings from different worlds had found something that transcended species, culture, and the vast emptiness of space. "So," Jake said, pulling her closer, "what's the first problem we need to solve?" "Well," Zephyra said, her eyes twinkling with mischief, "there's the matter of explaining to the Earth authorities why their engineer isn't coming home. I'm sure we'll think of something. We always do." As the twin moons of Nexaria rose over the horizon, Jake Morrison and Queen Zephyra stood together in their workshop, planning a future that would bridge the gap between worlds. The small folding knife that had started it all lay forgotten on the workbench, its simple blade having accomplished something that all the advanced weapons in the galaxy couldn't. It had opened the door to understanding between two species. And in the depths of the palace, the power core hummed with steady light, a symbol of the infinite possibilities that awaited when different worlds learned to work together. The story of the human who had been mocked for his tiny blade had become the story of love conquering fear, innovation overcoming tradition, and the discovery that sometimes the smallest gestures could change the entire universe.